Aloha, I'm Thomas Mohbat from Eliki Music Productions here in Hilo, Hawaii. Today I would like to show you how you can easily import and export audio WAV files into your digital audio workstation. Hi, I'm Thomas Mohbat. I'm the owner and engineer here at Eliki Music Studios in Hilo, Hawaii. I'm going to be showing you today how to deal with exporting and importing audio tracks that are coming from other recording studios, or perhaps you're sending them out to a recording studio for work. Used to be musicians and bands would come into your studio and kind of do the whole project from beginning to end. I think those days are long gone. I miss them because it was good income. But these days, you're more apt to get a band coming in and starting to record with you. And sometimes it'll go out to another studio for overdubs or mixdown. It might go to their home recording studios where they feel comfortable adding overdubs, vocals, or whatever. Anyway, you're gonna have to get used to that process of files and projects coming in and landing in your lap, and then also going back out for other work elsewhere. It's just sort of the ebb and flow of today's recording process, which is good and bad. I mean, I do like that sometimes a project will come in from another studio and I get to do work on it, but that's a double-edged sword. You might be working on a project for a long time, and then the client decides they want to mix it elsewhere or send it off to another state or even another country for further production. You get it a lot in film and video too. You never know who's going to be working on it, so you have to get good at sending out individual tracks as well as stems, which are not the same thing, by the way. A lot of misconception about stems and individual audio tracks, which I'm going to try to clear up here. I'm using a DAW or digital audio workstation called Digital Performer. It's from a company in Boston, Massachusetts called Mark of the Unicorn. They've been around for a long time, and they make this product called Digital Performer, which is my preferred DAW. I like it better than Pro Tools. I really like it better than Logic. I won't go too into that, but Logic can be very, very complicated. A lot of guys are using it, a lot of girls are using it, and it can be a bear to sort out. It's kind of counterintuitive. I'm not a really big fan of Logic. I do have it on my computer, and I do get projects that come in as Logic projects, which is nice, and I can just pop them right up and see them in Logic right away. But I always try to get the files organized and exported and then re-imported into Digital Performer. I've just been using it for so long that I'm really familiar with it, and I feel more powerful and confident and fast in Digital Performer. So I prefer to work there. If you're comfortable in Logic, great. If you're a Pro Tools enthusiast, that's great too. More power to you. Especially in film and video work, that's almost all Pro Tools work right now. But I'm kind of the underdog. I like still working with Digital Performer. I've been working with it since 1988, and I could probably do another tutorial on Digital Performer itself. It's got a lot of great features, and I won't go into that today. But what I will go into is how you're going to have to get used to tracks coming in and importing them into your DAW, and then importantly how you can export those tracks to another studio and another engineer without making his or her life miserable in that process. What you see here is pretty typical of what audio tracks and projects often look like. It might differ from DAW to DAW, but it's all going to be sort of like this. You're seeing waveforms and the different tracks for each instrument. I usually colorize my tracks, drums and cymbals in red and yellow. Bass, orange. I don't know why. Guitars, I'm always doing in light greens and blues. Vocals, almost always dark blue. It's really easy to see them for fine editing. They stick out. And then I'll do background vocals in pink, whether they're male or female. I just like having pink background vocals. And then after that, It varies a little bit. I've got a horn section here in greens and yellows, and that goes away. There's some extra horn stacks there. And then down at the bottom, I've got my percussion in pink. And then also there's a blue stereo piano. I put that all the way at the bottom, along with a reference mix of the song that the last version I'd have. I made a nice mix to send along with the track to the next engineer so he or she can look at it and kind of see what I'm doing, making sure things line up. If there's any confusion, they can listen to my reference mix and say, oh, I see where that goes. Or they can also hear my use of reverbs, EQs. They can kind of hear what I was up to the point where I'm sending it off to them. I always like to include a decent, not a final, but a decent reference mix of everything I've done. Sometimes I'll send an instrumental version as well without the vocal so they can hear the instrumentation and the detail of that without being distracted by the lead vocal. So having two different reference mixes is not uncommon. I always export the most recent mix that the client has done. They might have several mixes, but if they just say, send me the mix to this studio, I'll give them the last one we worked on. And if they want earlier versions, they need to tell me that so I can send multiple versions. There's some information that you're going to need to send to the engineer or the studio where it's going. One of the easiest things to do is just jot down on a note, or you can type it right into the file number or the folder name. Include the tempo, the BPM of the song if you've got one. In this case, that's 123 beats per minute. In 4/4, it's almost always in 4, but if you've got a different tempo or a time signature, indicate that to the next engineer. You can say, oh, this song's in 4/4 at 123 beats per minute. He can type that in right away, and he's not guessing around what the tempo is, because he might want to use that for adding other MIDI instruments or quantizing to a grid. Don't just let him have to freeform edit it. It's kind of important. The other thing that the next engineer is going to need to know is the sample rate. It's I always record at 48K, 24-bit integer. 48K is the sample rate, and you need to let the engineer know that. He should be able to figure it out when he drags the files in, but he might be recording at a different sample rate. It's just good to let him know what your rate is so there's no confusion there. It saves time. So those are the 3 things I include. 4 things if you include the meter. Is the tempo, the bit rate, and the sample rate. The bit depth and the sample rate, I should say. 24-bit, 48K, 123 beats per minute is simple information to send a note to the next engineer. What your goal is here is to get tracks that are looking like this to tracks that are looking more like this. I've gone ahead and pre-baked the cake here. These are what we're gonna get to. I'm gonna show you how to make your tracks go from that all chopped up and edited, and if you tried to export that to another studio, it would be a nightmare. There would just be a list of each of these little clips is a different file. Every track could have dozens or even hundreds of little files. And it's all nice when they line up in your DAW, but when you send that to another engineer, he's not going to know where those go. It's just going to be a nightmare. You can't do that. What you want to do is organize everything so that each track has all the information in it from beginning to end, and you're going to bounce it to files that look like this. Nice whole blocks from 0 to the end that engineer can drag into their session and drag them to 0, start, and everything's going to line up. If you don't do that, you're going to get a call and they're going to want to know what you're sending them. I get it a lot. People just send in all their tracks and want me to sort it out, but it takes hours and hours to do that. It's really inconvenient to have to stop your session to organize the tracks, and then you know the time that you've sat down to mix or work on those tracks, you're spending just getting the tracks ready to mix, and it's a real nightmare. So this is where you want to get them, and I'm going to show you how to do that. I like to do it so all my files are coming back I'm bouncing them back into the project instead of to an external folder. This way I can see the tracks to make sure they're complete. There's nothing cut off. I can go through and type in the names of the tracks. I'm going to show you how to do that. Even give the tracks a number. So when the engineer drags them into their session, they can see they're going to line up from top to bottom. My drums, my bass, whatever your preferred method is, that's fine. But this way, they're all going to drop down a list, and you won't have a tambourine as track number 1 and a horn as track number 2. This way, it's going to be organized just as you've got it organized in your workstation. I guess the real trick to understanding this dragging and dropping procedure is going to be that you want to take your entire track, or a couple of tracks there. I've got a couple guitar tracks, not too many edits, but there are a couple edits there. I want to make this all one big track instead of individual chopped up pieces. So you want to make sure that those little cuts between them are sounding good. If you need to go in and zoom in and create any little crossfades or anything like that, if you think that's necessary, taper your ins and outs, make everything nice and clean. And then zoom out so you can see the whole track. The idea is to select from the very end or even past the ending of the song all the way back to the beginning. And make sure you're zoomed out far enough in case there's a straggler, something sitting over here. You don't want to cut that off. Otherwise it won't be included in the bounce. But what I'm going to do is overview the whole track or tracks, select from past the end, just past the end, all the way to the very, very beginning. Don't stop short. You want to get all the way to 0 and select all of that. And then you can bounce that. And when you bounce that, it's going to merge all that data into one, or in this case, 2 complete tracks. That way, when the other engineer drags it into their session, and they can drag it to 0, absolute 0 start, and it's going to line up properly. And if you do that with all of the different tracks, everything should line up. If you drag all the way to 0, if you're just a little bit before 0, it's not going to quite line up, and that's a headache. So make sure that you drag all the way to 0 from end to beginning. And again, the idea is to get your final tracks to look something like this. They don't have to be orange, but they do have to look something like this. So what I'm going to do now, as I said, I've pre-baked the cake and I've already exported all the tracks here to show you what the end result is going to be. But what I'm going to do now is get rid of these and show you how I get there. So let me just highlight all these and delete them. And I'm going to show you how I made them. All right, let's take a second here. You don't want to send necessarily all this information to the new mixdown engineer. Chances are that he or she is going to want to mix fresh. They're not going to want to use your effects or your EQs or your volume levels or even your panning. You just want to give him the fresh, raw tracks as they were recorded so that he can start mixing it fresh and not have to undo your mix. It's kind of a hard thing to do, is to take another engineer's mix and get rid of volume data automation, pull off plugins. What you want to do is, as a mixing engineer, you want to bring in the project and load up the tracks and start right away. You don't want to be undoing another guy's work. So let me show you a couple things you can do here to make that easy. The first thing, after you've saved as an export file, like I mentioned, first of all, just put all your faders back at 0. Okay, you want to have the full resolution, and not, because when you bounce that, whatever, if you got a level on a, what is that, a bass DI, way down here for something, that might be how you wanted to mix it. You might not have been using the bass DI. You might have removed it entirely, and you're just using the amp. But if you bounce that, there's not going to be any audio data for him to mix. He might want to use that bass DI, direct input. So make sure that that's not muted or turned down or off. Put it back at 0. And just, in Digital Performer, you just double click And I think it's the same in most other DAWs, but double click or command click. And just to take a second to go through and put those all back to the beginning. And again, this is a copy, so you're not messing with your original mix. You can still go back to that original mix that you've been spending time on. You might be the mix down engineer. You're just sending this track off to another studio to add tracks, or you don't know what's going on. But this way you're not destroying your mix by making a save as copy, and that way all your levels are full volume for that other studio. And the last thing you've got to do is remove any plugins you've applied. They could be EQs, they could be compressors, they could be reverbs or special effects. You don't want to be giving those to another engineer. He's going to want to mix fresh and apply his own plugins. He doesn't necessarily want to deal with whatever EQ you've done to a track. You want to give them to him raw without any equalization, unless that's specifically something they've requested. If you've done a lot of work EQing an instrument or a voice and you want to include that information, make sure that the engineer wants that. Otherwise, give it to him raw. Same goes with effects. You don't want to give an engineer your chosen reverb, for example. You want to give it to him fresh, so he can make his own fresh decisions about what reverb he wants to use. That's the whole idea behind it. He's remixing it or mixing it different than you are. So turn off or bypass all of your effects. Again, this is a copy, so you can either remove them, like that, easy enough, or you can just bypass them, whichever you prefer. Put those back. I usually just bypass them. Just hold the Option key in Digital Performer, go through and just bypass all your EQs, all your compressors, whatever you've got on there. There's an amp I put on one of those direct. There's a specialized EQ I use for the vocal. I don't want to give the other engineer any of that. These are my secret tools. He doesn't get to use them. It would be nice to be able to bounce this all as one big thing. Here's the slight little problem with that, and this is another pet peeve I have when I'm getting tracks in from other studios, is I'll often get tracks that are supposed to be mono tracks, like a kick drum or a lead vocal or a tambourine. I'm getting stereo files from other studios. They're sending me these tracks that everything is a stereo file, and it's like that tambourine wasn't recorded with 2 microphones. If it was, then it is a stereo file. Or if the drum kit had 2 microphones for the overheads, that's a stereo file. But if there's only 1 microphone on it, it's not a stereo file, and it should be exported as a mono file, not a stereo file. So my point here is that when you are exporting, what you want to do is group all of your mono tracks together, like they are, and if you have any stereo tracks, like maybe a guitar amp that had 2 microphones on it, or in this case, a stereo MIDI piano, that bottom file that we just talked about, the upright piano, is a stereo MIDI piano. I want to export that as a stereo file. All the others are all mono tracks, I believe. Let me just double check here. But yeah, the guitars are mono amps. So what I've done is I've put the stereo piano all the way down at the bottom here. And in any other stereo tracks, like if there was an organ or any stereo thing, I'm going to put all those stereo tracks at the bottom, and I'll do those bounces separately as stereo tracks. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, so we're going to grab from around that cursor, from the top track, all the way. This is the kick drum, all those tracks, mono tracks, all the way to the beginning. Super important you get that click all the way at the beginning, and then drag down, oops, to select all of your tracks. And you can see they're in blue there. That's getting everything. And then release. You can see that blue selection area is getting all of my mono tracks from top to bottom. It looks like I've got a good selection there. Double check it to make sure you've got it right. If you're missing a little bit, you're going to have to bounce it again. And it takes a little time to do that, so get it right. You know, like they say, measure twice, cut once. You'll get it right the first time. When you hit bounce to this window is going to open up, and it's got some critical information that you're going to have to select here. The first thing that it's going to ask you in Digital Performer is the project format. If you leave it as it is, it will probably export those in Apple. It's going to probably export those as AIFF files. Those are fine for other Mac platforms, but you might be sending to a studio that doesn't have a Macintosh, and the most common file to send are WAV files. Those are pretty universal. There's this old Sound Designer file down here as well. I don't even know why that's still included. Maybe for Pro Tools? I don't know. I'll find out more about that. But I always export as WAV files. Those are pretty interchangeable across all platforms. You want to select interleaved as opposed to de-interleaved. So WAV files, interleaved. It's going to be an offline bounce, so it's not in real time. It's going to zip through in record time and do it very fast. You could do an online bounce if you want. It just takes more time. You don't need to listen to a bounce like you would a mixdown. So I'm going to leave that on offline bounce. Channels. Here is where you want to make an adjustment. You want to select mono, no attenuation. Okay. If you left them same as source, there's going to be some confusion when the computer's looking and it gets down to those stereo files. It's going to say those are stereo files. So it might leave all of your it might turn all of your mono files into stereo files, which is what I don't want to do. That's something I mentioned earlier, is that you want to export mono files, not mono files in a stereo file. It's a pain in the butt. So select mono, no attenuation. Sample format, you can leave at project default, or you can switch it over to 24-bit. It's going to be the same thing. I record it 24-bit. So by leaving it at project default, it's saying I'm going to export them at that same resolution. So that's fine. Just leave that at project default. Unless you're sending to another studio that doesn't have the abilities to work with the 24-bit file, but why would you want to do that? I don't know. So send them at whatever project default you're working on. Here's where I like to do things a little different. You could export to your desktop or to another folder directly, but what I like to do is add them to my sequence so that I get an extra chance to see them before I put them in that desktop folder, and I'll show you why to do that in a minute here. So we're gonna add them to the sequence, as opposed to do not import or add to soundbites window. Add to sequence is what you want, and that's going to put them up the top there, like I showed you earlier. Here you've got source and outputs. Select tracks, not the outputs from those tracks. Okay, you just selected all those tracks. You're not recording the outputs. It's a little tricky there, but just trust me on that one. And then here's a little trick. It'll give you a default file name, like the name of the song, mix, something like that. I don't want my files to have any name right now because I'm about to go in and rename them all. If you try to export that, it will say no can do. It's got to have some kind of a name there to export it. It's just a little glitch I've noticed. So what I do is I type in a little character like a dash, anything, a period, and we're going to actually remove that later. But if I give it a little name like that, or even XXX, something like that, it gives all these files a name, and it'll allow you to export. Without that name, it won't let you export those files. So let's just do the, I like my dash. And don't choose a folder. If you choose a folder, it's going to ask you where that folder is. You don't want to put them in that folder yet. It's just going to create more work for you. What you want to do, like I said, is import them back into the project, and then we're going to go in there and detail those tracks right before I put them in that final folder for sending out. Okay. And you're ready to hit that OK button and export. Here we go. And that'll take a few minutes to do. Good time for a break. what we've got here is all of my tracks bounced. And I have not exported them. If I had exported them to an external folder, I'd have to go in the folder to check them, but to do that, you can't really see the waveform. I like to get a visual confirmation of what I'm doing as well as just a file name and a number. You know, if I'm looking in a folder, I can see kick in, you know, but I don't know if there's any problems with it. Maybe the file was incomplete, you know, maybe it was clipped off for some reason. If it was in a folder, especially near the end of the song, you know, you might not notice that. You might send it off to your mixdown engineer or to the other studio and it was clipped off for some reason. Who knows? Bad things happen sometimes. But with doing it this way, you get a visual confirmation of all your tracks. And you can look, you can just take one good look at all that and say, boom, it all looks great. There's some blank tracks that I'm going to delete here in a second. There's a couple stereo tracks down at the bottom that have been bounced to a mono track, like I told you. There's some effects returns which are blank. We're going to remove all that stuff in just a second here. But one fell swoop, one overview of that, you can see those tracks are all pretty much ready to go. Let's go down and eliminate the tracks that we don't need. All these are looking good. We're going down to the bottom there. Now here we've got a couple tracks that were bounced that I'm not using. I might have muted. They're not being used anymore, so I don't need to give those to the other engineer. 3, 4 tracks of zero information. I'm going to delete them. Be careful you don't delete the wrong tracks though, because once you do, they're gone. You'd have to rebounce if you wanted to get them back. So now I've gotten rid of blank tracks. That's what I'm doing. I'm going through and eliminating any blank tracks that we don't need to send anywhere else. Here's an Afro drum pattern that only occurs right at the very end there. He just came at the very end. Another good example, I've included silence all the way up to that very end so that when you drag it in there, it'll line up perfectly. And just to drive this home a little harder, if I had not done that, even by just a little bit, when you try to drag that in, it's going to be in the wrong section of the song. So that's the whole secret sauce there, guys. Make sure you add that 0 to start information. So for easy dragging and dropping, the other engineer is actually going to be able to drag all of these tracks at once. He doesn't have to do them one at a time, which is another pain in the butt. I'll have to do them one at a time. I like grabbing all the tracks right out of a folder on my desktop, dragging them into this window here, my overview, my sequencer, and you can just drag them, drop them anywhere. They don't have to drag them to start right away. And then when you've got them all in there, make sure that each one is dragged to the very beginning. You can do them all together or check them individually, but there's no blank tracks. These are all the mono ones. That's looking good. Now, let's do the stereo ones again. Oh, I'm going to get rid of the, I didn't get rid of those yet. Walk with me, that's the mix. And classic right piano, delete. Boom. All the mono tracks are ready to go. Let's do the stereo ones. Let's go down to the bottom here. And now we're going to bounce our 2 stereo files. The reference mix and the stereo piano. Select these 2 tracks. Again, going back here to the beginning, or to the end, I should say. Selecting all the way to 0. Again, guys, make sure you get that right. Don't fall short there. I'm going to do the Command B for bounce. It's going to be, everything's going to be the same. The only thing we're going to do differently is the channels. I'm not going to do a mono like we did before. I'm going to do a stereo. That's all. Just switch that over to stereo. Everything else is the same. You can double check if you want to scroll down. You can see, yep. Those 2 channels right there are going to bounce. Don't worry about that other stuff. And just hit OK. Boom. Off to the races. Why do they say off to the races? Horse race? I guess it was something you looked forward to, you know? Off to the races. We're going gambling. We're going to spend the college tuition on horses. Do people still go to horse races? No, I don't think so, man. Life used to be more interesting before the internet. Used to go to horse races, get all dressed up and go to church and then go spend money at the horse race. We didn't sit at home on the internet watching YouTube videos. Coming to a conclusion, bada boom. There we go. Bounce is done on those stereo tracks. Let's scroll up to the top, and it's going to add them to the very top of the list. I took them from the bottom of the other list, moved them to the top because I bounced them last. So there's my stereo reference mix at the top there. If I zoom in, you can see the stereo reference mix is in stereo, and it also has that blank information at the beginning, so I can drag it to 0 and it'll line up with all the other tracks. That's a successful bounce right there. That's how you get everything ready. And as you can see, having a visual overview really helps. At the end there, you can see my bounce ended a little before the others, but that's okay. That's the end of that file. There's no information there. Now you're ready to start giving these nice recognizable titles. It's one of the things that engineers do a lot. I get a lot of files that come in, and they might be called audio file 1, audio file 2, audio file 27. They might not even have titles. They might just be file numbers. Who knows? What you want to do is create a track sheet. Back in the day, engineers used to fill out a sheet of paper that had 24 or 32 little squares on it, a grid, and you'd write what was on each track: kick drum, snare drum, vocals. You might even write the processing that was involved, whether you added a compressor, what kind of microphone you used, what kind of EQ you used. You would write that on the track sheet. It's kind of a lost art. You can include a lot of that information in the description or the notes window, which is often included in DAWs. But the most important thing is the name of the track. You want to let the engineer know what he's got, so that he doesn't have to guess. He doesn't have to listen and guess. Oh, that sounds like a bass guitar. But what if you had 2 bass guitars? You want to be clear about things. So what I'm going to do now is the last step, and that's going to be making sure that all of my titles, all of my tracks have a nice, easy to understand name, and it's not hard to do. You're just going to go in here, make sure, like the kick bounce that I did right there, it add a little number. It said kick, and then some information after that. I don't want that information. My engineer, the next engineer, he doesn't care about that. So you're just going to backtrack that and just call it kick in, the inside kick. Here's the kick trigger. That's clear, and so forth. That's all looking really good. The one exception I want to make with this is, like the 2 stereo files or any stereo files that you have, you want to indicate that those are stereo files. So when the other engineer has a list of files, he can look at all your mono files and say, oh, those are all monos. Here's the 2 stereo files. I'm going to drag those onto stereo tracks in my DAW. He's going to create a couple stereo tracks. He won't have to guess which files are mono, which files are stereo, or anything like that. He can say, oh, you've got 29 mono tracks and 2 stereo tracks. He'll create that in his workstation and just drag the files in. He'll probably drag all the mono files in as one big batch, and then he'll drag the 2 stereo files in separately and drag those onto 2 stereo tracks, dragging everything, again, to 0, like that. The last thing that I like to do, and this is extra credit, is I like to go through and give all of the tracks a number. You don't have to, but what you'll get when you export this is a folder, and the tracks will typically appear in alphabetical order. So you won't have your first track, the track that you want to appear at the top, which might be your reference mix or a kick drum, your drums. Those will appear later in the list alphabetically. So it makes a lot of sense to me to number them starting at the top all the way down. That way, when the next engineer looks at them, he can see numbered tracks, and the tracks at the top will see 1, 2, 3, 4. It's really easy, and he'll see exactly what you're seeing here. All the tracks will be in the same order from top to bottom, and it'll make more sense that way. You're not going to have horns at the top, vocals at the bottom, and all that mess. You want to kind of. What I do is I start with the reference mix at the very top. Here's how you do it. you go in and you just option click right there. And remember those little dashes we added? You can backspace now and get rid of that and just add 0 point. And 0 is going to be for the reference mix. Or if there's two of them, they could both be 0. If there's one instrumental, one with vocals, just title them both 0. Okay, so I've got that where I want it. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to do the same with all of my mono tracks. Kick drum, I'm going to give that 1. Again, backtracking over the dash, adding 1 and a dot, hitting return, and so forth. Kick 2. It's going to take about 5 minutes. 2. There we go. 33 tracks. 2 of them were stereo. You'll get another chance to check that out for typos after you copy it to another folder. The simple way to do it is just to, I guess you could grab them all like that, but that's going to be, that's not how I like to do it. You're including some information at the end here. You can see I don't want to do that. What I want to do is shift click from the top down. It just takes a second. You just go boom, shift click all your files. I'm selecting these for export. Don't let go of that shift key. Hang on to that shift key. Still shifting. There we go. See, right to the bottom. There. Don't start selecting these guys. Those are the original tracks. Just the ones you've just bounced. You can release that shift key now. And don't click anywhere in here, otherwise you've got to do it all again. Not all again, you've got to shift click them all again. So just while you've got them all selected like that, from top to bottom, you're ready to copy those to your desktop. Here's how you do it in Digital Performer. You go to File, Export, Selected Sound Bites. These are the sound bites I've selected. It's going to ask you where you want to put them. Here's your dialog box. I'm going to put them on my desktop. Otherwise, they might get sent to some folder within a folder, and you got to go find them. Just put them on your desktop there. And you want to create a new folder called the project. Let's give it my name here. Nick, all caps. I'm going to create a folder on the desktop, and then it's going to put all of those selected files into that folder in one click. Boom. Doesn't take as long as bouncing, because it's just copying them. It's not crunching all that information. It's just making a copy. So that should be done. What I can do now, I'm not going to close my DAW. I'm going to leave it open in case there's any problems. Don't quit yet. You got to check it before you quit. Otherwise, you'll have to reopen the DAW. So let's just hide that for a second and look at my desktop. That's the folder I'm concerned with right now. And that's the export folder. And let's open that up. And you can see how nice and even that looks. Look at that. All nice in order, numbered. Again, if you got typos, correct them. Don't send off stuff. That's the first thing the next guy's going to see is your typos, and anything sloppy. It all adds up, right? We're professionals. That's ready to give to your next engineer. You can send that. You could drop that on a thumb drive if you had a big or external drive. Like one of these guys. These are super handy, these LaCie SSD drives. These are super durable. I recommend them to all my clients. Get at least one of these, depending on the size of the project. This is a 1 terabyte drive. You can get them up to 5 terabytes, I think. It costs a little bit more, but they're all $100 or $200. You can get 1 terabyte drive like this for less than $100, and that's a good place to give your client all their files can sit on there. It's like we used to give clients the master tape back in the day. They would take the master tape and store it in a safe or in a closet, someplace safe. We don't have tapes like that anymore, so everything's going to go on a final drive like this. So this is a good way to give your clients not only their export files, but their project files as well. They might not be able to open Digital Performer files, but in the future, if they wanted to revisit that project, they could open up the Digital Performer or the Pro Tools file in another DAW and pick up right where you left off years later. But probably they're not going to go into a studio that has Digital Performer unless they come back to you. In which case they could open up those export files like we talked about in any other DAW. That's the whole point of today's conversation, was to be able to open up and drag those files into any DAW, drag them to 0, and you're cooking with gas. But anyway, these are available. I'll leave a link down below if you want to pick one up. They're great drives. They can take a lick and you can drop them. I wouldn't recommend dropping them, but if you do drop them, they've got a little shock case to them. They're super solid and not too expensive. So you can also go to a Dropbox account and upload that whole folder into a Dropbox and upload that, and then send a link to the other studio or the other engineer, and he can download that whole. It's going to be a big upload, and it's going to take some time. And those are going to drop into a DAW in that same order because you numbered them. Super clear. All right, now I'm going to show you how to drag these exported files that we just did into a brand new DAW. I'm using the same software, obviously, Digital Performer, but you could do this with Logic or Pro Tools, anything like that. The first thing you got to do is open up a brand new project. Make sure that your settings are the same. That is, you want to go in and make sure that 48K is selected, 24-bit. Here we go. And 30 frames per second. If you're dealing with film, make sure that you got your frame rate right, but we're not dealing with that here. And also the tempo of your song, the BPM, as we talked about at the beginning of the day. The next thing you're going to want to do is create a little room on your desktop like this. Just drag it over off the side. You got to make a little room for your folder so you can see your DAW as well as your folder, so they're not covering each other up. And then just click on the folder, select all, click on any one of them, drag it onto your empty DAW workspace. Drag them over, release. It's going to take a minute because it's got to process all that incoming information. It's dragging over 33 different tracks of high definition 48K 24-bit WAV files. It's a big crunch. The faster the computer, the faster this is going to work. This is an older computer, but it's still pretty lickety-split. And look at that. It's just dropping them all. You don't even have to drag them to 0. It's automatically putting everything right at 0. It's putting them in the order that I've dropped them in. That's where those numbers come in handy. Otherwise, they would just drop them in alphabetically. But you can see it's creating a new track for each of those automatically. You don't have to do that. It used to be you'd have to create all these different tracks, then drag the files into those tracks. Now you just drag all the files straight into an empty DAW, and it takes care of it for you. It's doing some background processing on all those, just takes a second. The nice thing about doing this way is that it automatically gives your track overview on the left here. It automatically gives you those titles, so you don't have to retype in the name of those tracks. You can go over to your mixing board here, and down at the bottom, again, you're seeing the names of your tracks. You don't have to retype in your track information, which used to be a time-consuming thing. You might want to go ahead and refine them a little bit. You don't need quite so much information. You could just make that kick you know, you don't need the numbers anymore. So you might want to do that, like kick in. It's up to you. It's not bothering you. It's not changing anything. Just kick trigger. It's probably easier to do it here, huh? Just go through and retitle them. You don't have to. It's up to you. The sweet thing about it, though, is you don't have to retype everything, and everything's going to line up just fine from 0. So as you can see, when I play that from the beginning, boom, everything's starting simultaneously, in sync, no headaches, ready to go, ready to start mixing. If you like this video and it's been helpful to you, save you some time, give me a like. It helps me out a lot. If you can just take a second to do that right now. And if you would like to see more videos like this as I develop them, hit the subscribe button on your screen. Do it now. Do it now. It'll definitely help me continue making these videos, and you'll see more information like this coming up. We're trying to put out information that's not readily available or hard to find on YouTube or wherever. So if you're stuck on something or would like to see a streamlined way to do something, let me know in the comments section, or drop me an email or a text, and or give me a call. I'm not hard to find in Hilo. Thanks for your time and paying attention. And I know it's been a long lesson, but I think it's going to save you a lot of time to do it this way. Aloha from Hilo, Hawaii.